Wreszcie!
Ladies and gentlemen, representing Tartu A from the opening government, we believe that the current oppositional identities that constitute the social realm in Iraq, that are defined in terms of Sunni and Shia religions, are not conducive to long-term sustainability and stability in that state. So from the opening government, we suppose that we redefine those core identities in terms that are better conducive to those values. So what we're going to do is that we're going to fund the spread of atheism, or we're going to promote the spread of atheism in Iraq through things like education and welfare. I'm going to do 4 things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to tell you what the model is. Secondly, I'm going to tell you about the moral obligation that the Western states actually has to fund those services and promote atheism in Iraq, both to its own citizens and the citizens in Iraq. Secondly, I'm going to talk about fighting radicalism in Iraq, and as a third substantive point, I'm going to talk about why it is essential to redefine those core identities. But first of all, a bit of framing. How we're going to spread this funding is we're going to do it both via the central government and via NGOs. We think we would prefer to use NGOs in many instances because they're going to be seen as more impartial by both the Shias and the Sunnis, right? What we're going to do is that we're going to build schools that provide secular education within Iraq. We're also going to provide basic resources for people, like food, clean water, and healthcare, because we think that those resources are essential so that people don't turn to radical groups like the Islamic State. Who is going to be providing the funding? It's going to be the US and the EU. We think that those are the 2 actors that have both the largest capacity to provide that sort of funding, and also have the most interest in providing that sort of funding. Thirdly, and this is a very important thing, we recognize that the rise of atheism in Iraq is not going to be instantaneous. We see it as a very gradual, transgenerational process that is probably going to take a long time, but ultimately is going to provide the sort of sustainability that we strive for. So 3 substantive points. Firstly, let's turn to the moral obligation of Western states to provide that sort of funding. So we think that, first of all, Western states are directly responsible for a lot of the religious strife that is currently going on in Iraq, right? Most fundamentally, perhaps, via the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where the borders of Iraq were drawn pretty much completely randomly, which created a state that has a 40% Sunni minority and a 60% Shia majority, which is extremely polarizing politically. Also, there are Kurds in the state, which are a completely different faction who are also fighting for autonomy, creating conditions for massive strife just because of Western carelessness. We think this is the first point where a moral obligation to support these states comes from, right? Secondly, we think that CIA, via its Operation Cyclone during the Soviet-Afghan War, funneled hundreds of millions of dollars to the Mujahideen via Pakistan, which are the direct ideological and also military forebearers of the Islamic State, right? So we think that providing actually this sort of funding, skills, and resources to those people has created the sort of radicalism that we see today, right? Perhaps most importantly, we think that the US intervention in Iraq was not only completely illegitimate and unjustified when you look at it retrospectively, but it disempowered the Sunni community in Iraq by placing this sort of a puppet Shia government in power and creating massive resentment within that state. Which means that currently Sunnis are turning to jihadists because they're the only form of legitimate political representation for that group within Iraq. Right? So we think that for all of those reasons, Western states have massively contributed to strife in the region. Also, we think that Western states have a moral obligation to protect their own citizens from radicalism in Iraq. The Islamic State has been actively targeting citizens of Western liberal democracies for several years now, from downing a Russian airliner over Sinai in 2015, to the Paris attacks in 2015, and also the Orlando Gay Club massacre in June 12, 2016. So we think that we have a very clear obligation on several grounds to do this sort of funding. Secondly, what is going to be the impact of this sort of thing? Before I move to this PI.
Who do you suppose will actually go to these schools?
Everyone. We think the schools have already been massively successful, both Sunnis and Shias. Like in Afghanistan, people value education. They don't have like many other options available to them necessarily. We think that if girls in Afghanistan go to those schools, as the female literacy rate in Afghanistan has tripled since the West started funding those schools, they'll probably be successful in Iraq as well. Right? We're into the second impact, fighting radicalism and ISIS in Iraq. Essentially, don't think that ISIS has as broad of an ideological support as you might think, because we do believe that a lot of people actually turn to ISIS because they have no other option, right? We think that in a lot of cases, ISIS is the only thing that stands between those people and sickness and starvation. Through providing this sort of funding, we provide the people with an alternative opportunity to use those resources, those schools, and not go to this sort of a radical realm of indoctrination where people adopt radical beliefs and can instead adopt secular atheist beliefs. Now, secondly, we think, and as I already mentioned, for a lot of Sunnis in Iraq, ISIS is the only formal legitimate political representation. There is no other legitimate political party representing them, and that is why they turn to ISIS. Because ISIS says that we're never going to comprise on Sunni political power. We're always going to be representative of you, and that's why people don't essentially turn to them. We're going to provide them with another choice, right? Thirdly, let's talk about redefining identities. We think that a lot of the culture of violence in Iraq is like defined in terms of Sunni Shia identities being constructed oppositionally. And we think that a big part of it is that the mutual atrocities committed by those groups against each other are a big part of that identity. So when you get a Sunni or a Shia education, for example, a part of that education is talking about the mutual violence of that those groups have committed against each other. We think that through those religious schools, we remove this oppositional part from the core identities of those people, particularly the Sunni and Shia children who are going to go to those schools. We're going to provide them with a neutral arena where people can socialize without their identities being defined explicitly against each other, right? And we think that this is massively going to promote sustainable development and peace in Iraq in the long term. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for those remarks and call upon the Leader of the Opposition.
Our case is very simple. We say that no religion is inherently violent. The reason that we have violence in Iraq is because of political reasons. And we think that trying to impose religious views on the community is going to harm the things happening there more than it's going to help them. So 2 points today. The first will be about imposing religious identities and how does that affect the population, why we shouldn't do it. The second will be about how we are affecting cooperation with the West and how we are affecting the extreme ideologies that exist in Iraq today. First of all, some short rebuttal. So basically we heard that we need to help the people of Iraq and give them resources and give them all these things so they're not as desperate, right? But the thing is that we can do all of what government told you without trying to impose impose atheist views on them. So we think the time to, since, as we will show you, imposing atheist views is so harmful, we should just give the resources without adding that atheist indoctrination to it. Now we heard that religious schools are harmful, so we need atheist schools which are neutral. But notice that atheist schools are not neutral. They are schools that teach you about atheism, right? So we are for neutral schools. We are not for atheist indoctrination, and we also think that the local population is going to be more extreme as a result of this indoctrination. Okay, so about imposing religious views. We have a very basic idea here. We're telling you no religion is inherently violent. Right? Because even if you look at Islam, there are hadiths within the Islam and parts of the Quran that are very peaceful and other parts that are more violent. And certain groups within Iraq and within the Islamic community choose to relate to certain parts of the religion that are more violent because of political background. Now notice that our government agrees with us with this, right? Because they explain to you that the violence in Iraq is not only related to religion, but it's related to the fact that you have the Kurdish population. It's related to the Sykes-Picot agreements, which are political agreements, right? They say that. And it's related to the United States interfering in Iraq in the past, right? So it's a result of the past historical tensions in this area and a lot of the political processes, and the extreme organizations are using religion as a tool, but that does not mean the religion is the cause of the violence, and that does not mean we should remove the religion. Now notice that atheism is not inherently peaceful either, right? Because we have seen, like, for example, communist Russia was a very atheist country, but it was a very violent country. So if you don't remove the political reasons, but you remove the religion, that's not going to create any difference, because you can still be a violent atheist. So what we are telling you is that religions and atheism are equal in their violentness, but religion is a deep part of the identity of people living in these countries, a deep part of their cultures and their communities. And when we are coming and saying we're going to impose a Western culture on you, we are taking away their right to have the freedom of religion and the freedom of culture and to express their identities in the way that they want, and we don't think that that is a legitimate thing. Second house, do you have a POI for us?
Yeah. All this is very nice, except we're not opposing, but rather giving incentives to people. And get to that, please.
Okay, so the thing is that maybe you are giving incentives but not imposing. But this isn't only a matter of what you think you're doing. It's a matter of how the local population is likely to understand. And because the local population is already prone to looking at the West as meddlesome, and already extreme ideologies are saying, look, the West is meddling and trying to change our identities and Islam is in danger, the likely way that most people will understand this is as an attempt at indoctrination rather than an attempt at giving incentives. And even if you're giving me incentives to change my identity, that is still likely to upset me because I don't want to change my identity. So this brings me to my second point about how we are affecting cooperation, how we're affecting the local populations, and we talk about two parts. The first will be about cooperation with the West, and the second will be about how we're affecting extreme ideologies. So, in these areas, many people are very religious, or just moderately religious, but religion is a part of their identity, and it's a part of their culture, and it's a part of where people meet, how communities form. They form around religious institutions. It's a part of where people get spiritual guidance, and a part of how they define themselves, and the most basic values that they believe in. So we think that when people hear that Western-funded organizations are coming into those states and trying to promote atheist values, they're likely to see that as an imposition on their identities, because religion is such a big part of how they define themselves and how they define their identities. They're likely to think that their identities are under attack. Now, because people feel that that is an infringement on their beliefs, they're already less likely to cooperate with these institutions. So either, first of all, they just don't want to go there, right? Because I don't want to send my children to a school that teaches an ideology I don't believe in. I don't want to go to a doctor that is going to try to convince me about some religious ideology rather than just trying to treat my illnesses. I just don't want to go there. But even if I do go there, because I have no choice, as government will have you believe, then I'm still inherently suspicious of these people. I don't want to cooperate. I'm all the time thinking in my head, well, you know, I have to remember that they are cooperating with ideologies I don't believe in. I have to remember that they are against me in a manner. I don't want to cooperate with them fully. And when my children go to that school, I tell them, okay, I'm sending you to that school because it's the only way where you can learn how to read, but don't listen to your teachers about anything else. And then and then we are creating more suspicion of the West and less cooperation with these institutions in the future. Now, about extreme ideologies, right? Because, yeah, I'll take you before, yeah.
And both Sunni and Shia children, when are taught about their religion, are also taught about the mutual violence committed against each other. How is it going to solve the problem of violence in the long term in Iraq? And continue providing this.
Okay, right, because as we already explained, violence is a result of political and economic reasons, so just giving resources and making people less desperate economically is likely to change that. But second of all, you can have neutral schools that teach people to cooperate without indoctrinating atheism on them. Our problem is not Western-funded schools, our problem is atheist schools promoting atheism. Now, about extreme ideologies. Look, extremists like ISIS and other fundamentalist and terrorist organizations rely on this idea that Islam is in danger. You need to protect Islam because the West and Western culture is coming in, overtaking our local culture, and it's threatening our local culture. Now, when Western organizations come into these countries and try to impose atheism, which is viewed as a Western thing because less people in these areas are atheists and more people in the West are atheists, so they view that as a Western ideology, they feel like that is a proof that these extreme religious ideologies are correct, so more people are more likely to be swayed to these extreme ideologies, so we're actually getting more radicalism as a result of what proposition is offering you. So for all of these reasons, please oppose.
I'd like to thank the Leader of Opposition for that fine speech and look across the table to the Deputy Leader of Government to reply.
Key question that the opposition has not understood in our case is the fact that the divide that we have created to some extent, but has been already at the beginning of times between the Sunnis and Shias in Iraq is something that is going to lead to a civil strife after a civil strife after a civil strife. This is why we want to educate a new generation of people who understand that there is something beyond Islam, that there are other options in how to define themselves in order for this state to ever be actually able to function normally. What is the status quo? There is massive instability in the country, right? People are growing up amid chaos. They're most probably not receiving any education currently because all of the people are either afraid to send people out, or there is nobody willing to actually provide this education currently due to lack of resources, due to lack of professors or like teachers and stuff like that. So what those people grow up in is the Islam. It's the only thing they're taught at home. Most probably their parents have not also been educated. They know nothing else than the fact that you really need to go by the principles of Islam. It is the most important thing that those children will be taught, and that is what they define themselves as. We think that in this situation, we don't even need to indoctrinate atheism into those people, but what we need to give them is an objective, is a school that actually teaches secularism and teaches stuff through the lenses of objectivism. We don't need to actually say that we're going to preach atheism in these countries. What we propose is that those schools are going to teach you your ABCs, calculus, they're going to teach you sciences, they're going to teach you biology and stuff like that. They're going to teach you history from the perspective that doesn't actually focus on the divide between the Sunnis and Shias. It is going to teach you the history as it actually was, and it doesn't teach like Sunnis to start going against the Shias and the opposite direction. It simply is more objective. I'm going to talk about how this transformation through education will actually occur, how the fact that we're providing basic welfare is also a very important key to that, Then I'm going to tell you about the value of this education, and then about the self-interest of the West to engage in this, and how we're actually going to get some kind of stability in Iraq. First of all, we heard from all the rebuttal we've been to Roman. We heard from the opposition that kids won't be sent to school. We oppose that. We think that there are several reasons why kids will be sent to school. Because their parents still want their kids to have a bright future, or at least some more perspectives than they did. Thus, if there is any kind of education available, they're most probably going to put their kids there, right? Kids themselves want to go because they actually have nothing to do, and they also, to some extent, realize that there is a value in obtaining education. And like for the kids themselves and their parents, there is a very big value in the fact that those kids are out of the streets, out of the dangerous zones, and actually doing something productive. Bear in mind that most probably in many areas there is no local schooling available, which is another point in our favor why those kids will be sent to school. If they tell us that it will be an imposition of identities, then what we simply tell you is that it won't. The fact that this school is secularism doesn't mean that it's preaching secularism per se. It's simply not adding any religious or Islam-related doctrines into the teaching that it gives away. Why we think that this is fair under the motion is because we think that atheism is something that is a way of life that you can come to when you already are educated, where you understand that your reality mustn't only be, or it cannot only be simply Islam. Now, what will be taught in those schools? There will be the basic curriculums simply without the idea that there is Islam involved, right? We think that what we are going to incite, or what we are going to get to those kids to think about is curiosity about how the world works outside my current world, curiosity about how things work. I want to know what's higher maths. I want to know how to read books and understand books full of analysis, not simply descriptions. What we're doing by that is we're making the perspective of those kids' worlds wider. The fact that it doesn't only have to be the anger I have against the oppressors in my country, and the fact that I have to topple them. In addition to that, what there's actually going to be is that there is going to be relief in the areas of providing, as we provide welfare. They won't have to struggling that hard while they obtain this education. Closing.
If you're really sick and you're going to the hospital and the doctor says he can help you, but only under the condition that you become a devout Muslim, would you say that this is moral or acceptable?
I don't think that is what we like. We're not forcing those people to become atheists due to going to this school. What our side has to protect is the fact that there is a benefit in those people going to those schools and actually becoming more and more atheists, becoming more and more distant from the idea that Islam as something is what they only have to go by. We think that is a value in itself. We think that is going to widen the perspectives of those children, to make them understand that this Sunni and Shia divide doesn't have to be something that defines them and something that they have to fight till the end of their lives for. We think that this is something that is actually going to bring about, even if it's in the next generation or the generation after that, it's actually going to bring about the fact that those people are willing to cooperate on the state level in order to actually bring about a society that is able to function, a society that is able to have a representative government, and a society where you actually can have economic policies because there is not always civil war. What is the self-interest of the West? We actually heard no response to the idea that the West is morally responsible for this divide that we have created in Iraq, and the fact that we actually have to find for solutions to the idea that we have created a persistent sphere of civil rights in this country. But furthermore, we think there is a direct threat to the Western states by the fact that ISIS, which is the dominant feature that everybody in Iraq is mostly going to because they really don't have welfare, education, or knowledge that they could have a different life, that ISIS is actually causing a lot of trouble in the West because there are a lot of bombings. And secondly, the influx of refugees is something that the Western states are actually struggling with right now. Thus, they're looking for a solution, and the solution is educating those people, is putting the idea that secularism is something that can take them a long way into their heads, which actually is going to achieve the end we all wish. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the Deputy
they want to create a new identity for these people. They have never explained to you, A, why this identity will actually be created when answering Netta's backlash analysis. And second, they have never explained to you why this is mutually exclusive with doing this while teaching them Islam, or at least acknowledging the Islamic part in their identity. 2 points of extraneous rebuttal, and then 3 points. First, on the right to intervene. Second, on the response of key populations. And third, how it is likely that those schools and hospitals are actually going to work. So, the first government tried to narrow this motion down to secularism and science. And we don't accept that only atheists can be curious and learn science. We think you can absolutely do that if you're religious and you can get religious education. So we don't get the narrowing down of this motion, or why it is mutually exclusive with spreading atheism as per the wording of the motion. And we think basically that whenever we force a narrative that is contrary to the local population's narrative, that is atheism versus religion, that is already likely to cause adverse reactions from the population, irrespective of whether you teach them objectively good values like curiosity. The message is going to be intrusive and invasive no matter what you teach them. They tell us that kids will be sent to those schools and therefore learn. I will answer that in my point, but note that the comparative in this debate is not an NGO school or no school at all. It is an NGO school or ISIS school, and that is exactly what we're trying to say. That the existence of those NGO schools and their invasiveness and adverse reaction that they're going to cause in the population are going to cause further extremism in the population, further making parents send their children to ISIS schools. So let's talk about the right to intervene. So the first government tells us, well, we've done a very bad thing, and it gives us the responsibility to fix it. To which we agree, but they never explain to us why we need to fix this specifically in this way, or why we have the right to intervene in the internal affairs of another state which we have already screwed up so much, as the government have told us. No. This gets no answer to Netta's point about we have no right to intervene specifically in this way, and we're absolutely fine with giving them funds and any other medical supplies they need without the message of atheism. Netta basically tells you that this cultural imperialism is just not right, nor is it practical because it causes the opposite reaction that first government are telling us. The comparative we're offering you in this debate is also a long-term process, just like first government tell us. It is a long-term process of keeping actual stability in terms of political and military stuff in those countries, allowing those populations to coexist with each other, regardless of forcing a religious narrative on them. So on both sides of the house, you have a long process and slow reparation. But on our side of the house, you get it without intrusiveness and without antagonism to the West, which is we already think is a good thing. Let's talk about responding to populations. So first government tells us that they want a unified identity, never explaining why it will be seen as such and not as Western coercion. That note, they assume mutual exclusivity. They assume that once I stop hating my other ethnical populations, then everything will be fine and I will have no hate left in my life. To which we say, first of all, it is definitely possible to hate both the other ethnic minorities and the West. That is, trying to force this atheist narrative is not necessarily going to work, and it is going to only add hatred to the West because of this intervention, which we already think is a bad impact on our side of the debate. We think, as Netta analyzed basically, that those NGOs are going to be seen as coercive because these populations are already sensitive to Western intervention. Why is that? Because the West has already done a pretty bad job in intervening in Iraq so far. They've had a very, very long military intrusion that has led to no practical results. They have had American soldiers stationed everywhere, stealing goods, raping people, doing very, very bad things that are often not much better than what other minorities have been doing in Iraq. So these populations are already adverse against the West, but note they are still going to be adverse against each other. Because first government tell us that their kids are going to be sent to those schools and that's going to be fine. But you know what will happen when one ethnic minority decides to send their children to these schools? All the other ethnical minorities will basically decide not to. Why? Because the West is coercive, and also because that other ethnical minority, the Kurds, have sent their children to the school already, and I don't want my children studying with Kurds. So we don't see kids getting to those schools. We don't see kids getting medical supplies or education like first government want them to. And basically, we also think that the very fact that those children will not be getting the services that we want to be offering them is also a very bad thing. But we also think that those who will be going to these schools will be perceived as West-loving traders, etc., because they are buying into the coercive narrative of the West, which again will cause targeting of these populations, which is another bad impact on our side of the debate. I want to take closing.
Okay, so you're kind of forgetting that the United States is still present in Iraq, meaning we already have all this kind of backlash influence. The question is, how do we stay there but have a better presence?
presence doesn't make it so. The fact that we say that we're sending a neutral message doesn't mean that it is accepted as such by the population. And I'm going to analyze right now how the schools and clinics are likely to work and why they will be seen as coercive, even if they are only giving incentives as per European law. So what is likely to happen? First, second government want to have the cake and eat it too, right? Let's just offer them all the good things, and if they don't want to take them, then fine, they can just ignore us. Not true. Why is that? Because these clinics and schools will be run by NGOs. NGOs are very well-meaning people, but they also have like a sort of, I forget the English word, but they have an interest in spreading their own agenda. Their own agenda is just very good and neutral, promoting human rights, promoting atheism, and all that. But the problem is that well-intentioned people can also be seen as coercive and will also be seen as coercive by the local population, because they will be integrating with the local population. They will be offering a Band-Aid together with a lesson about atheism. They will be going to the supermarket and saying, hey, have you seen my wonderful atheist school? So it is not entirely possible for the local populations to ignore the existence of those incentives. So the Western people coercing, or at least being seen as coercing, will be seen across Iraq and will be indeed perceived by the population as a coercive force because they are already likely to do so, as we've analyzed. So what we have is basically the very presence of an atheist agenda, which is contrary to the local populations, being seen by the local population as coercive, furthering conflicts between minorities and ethnic groups in Iraq, and adding on to that hatred of the West and its coercive influence. We don't believe any of those things are good. We believe that on either side of the house, we have a long and hard process ahead of us, but we believe that we don't want to add to that on our side of the house hatred of the West on the top of hatred of other ethnic minorities. That is why we believe that the main impact is on our side of the house. That is why we believe that at least we want people not to hate the West that is trying to do something better for those populations. We want the West to be seen as a good force, and that is why we call upon you to oppose.
I would like to thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for that speech and all of the speakers in the top half of this debate so far, as we call upon the Member of Government to open the closing government team.
We're going to concede that people would actually reform and see the atheist light. We think that it's more likely for a change to happen, first of all, on a superficial level. We think that the kind of change that we're bringing about would be a gradual process of, first of all, influencing the public sight of religion, meaning that people would not be religious in public. We think that this is all in all a better Iraq, and we think we're solving many of the current problems that we would see in Iraq by that means and create more hope for the long run. That's why I'm going to analyze why people would take the bait as it is, and then why we would have the change that we want. But first, a rebuttal. So, about the existence of the problem. Opening opposition is ignoring the fact that Iraq right now is in the middle of a religious war, not necessarily because Muhammad said so, but because religion is a label that is very convenient for political reasons. The Sunnis hate the Shias, not necessarily because of theology, but because of their bad history. They see themselves as tribes because they remember that during the time of Sadat, certain religions didn't get resources. When the Americans came, it was the Shias that were in power, and then they made the Sunnis feel like they have no ability to get money, to get access to government, and so on. We don't think that the religious schools are going to solve that because there are many politicians on all sides, and there is actual fear coming from each section that they would be screwed over if one minority gets a say over them. We see that this is why there are so many bombs against Muslims more than there are against the US military in Iraq. We say that this is something that we should fight, and neutral schools are not going to solve that. But even if we take their case at their best, we would now build neutral schools. If the alternative that they say, that in status quo, the only thing that exists besides it is ISIS schools, then I guess neutral schools would also seen as Western imposition coming from the West by Western NGOs. So we don't understand why there would be a change there. We think that the likely scenario is that there are certain infrastructures that exist that are religious, that are not that good. We are going to create better schools, better healthcare, better services. Now, then they go and talk about the backlash. Now here, first of all, we ask in a POI, the US is already there. What kind of delta can you add to the backlash? What would happen? Secondly, we say that there are different factions, so we're not sure that they would become much stronger. But thirdly, if people don't go to mosques, and there would be enough people that would now take this bait, they are less susceptible to propaganda telling them that the Prophet requires them to go against the West. They would meet less people that tell them that they should go against the West, and we think that this creates a better world. Now, why do we think that there would be this mass of people? Why would people take the bait? So, first of all, we already heard that most people want to improve their lives. I think that especially in Iraq, since there isn't a lot of choice, and here you have something that is really better, and people are tired of war. People are sick of that. People are tired of having bombs against them. They would take that. But we say moreover than that, people would feel like they are screwing over the West, that they get a win-win. Why? Because you can still go to the clinic just without your hijab, or you can still eat halal food at home. You can still pray because you don't need a mosque for that, but yet you get the better education. And according to the logic from opening opposition, you can still teach your kids at home that, yes, religion is a good thing. So let them read that in school. So people would feel like they are winning on both sides. They get better services, and they can still be religious at home, or they at least can still have a community, just not labeling that as religion. So we think that many people would go for that bait, or at least we would have a critical mass of people doing that. Now, we don't think that it's likely that they would start killing each other if they go to school. First of all, because geographically, they don't live in the same areas. The Shias and the Sunnis, usually they're in different places. It would be harder for them, except in Baghdad, where we're willing to put more guards and to make sure that those kids are not being hurt because we have the money to do so. But then, if we have at least this critical mass, why do we think that this creates a change for the better? Here, notice that on the practical level, it would be much harder for religious leaders to actually spread propaganda through mosques, because people wouldn't have the ability to go to the mosque because they know now that they won't get medical treatment. So less exposure to that. And yes, most people, we don't think, own enough TVs or radio and so on to hear those messages from other places. Secondly, it would be hard for them to distinguish who is who. When you don't see someone going to that center, when you don't see someone going to that mosque or wearing that certain costume, it's very hard to say, I can be violent to this person on a daily basis. Once again, there are less instances of hatred in daily life. Further than that, we say that there are less public gatherings that could be bombed now, because you cannot say, this is a mosque that I want to hurt. These are the Shias, these are the bad guys. But in the long run, we are also creating a change of mind. We are making people more susceptible in the future, first of all, to see the idea of the existence of separation between church and state. The idea that you now make religious something that you do at home and not necessarily outside, which is already a good basis. Before I continue, first.
Okay, we explained that religion is a fundamentally basic part of our identity. This type of opposition is more divisive than other forms of intervention.
A, it's not imposition, it's an incentive. You can choose otherwise, but B, you can still be religious. Most of the things that are religious don't have to do with the way you are seen by those NGOs, and the NGOs cannot tell whether you actually believe or not. They can only look at the superficial things in order for you to know. What kind of changes do we also create? We can create a situation where children would be less religious, or at least have more of a chance. Why? Because at least they hear certain atheist ideas and they have more room to think about it, something that they didn't have in the future. B, because they see less of that in the street, meaning that they have more chances of that. Lastly, we say that we are creating a society that at least looks more homogeneous, at least a society that feels like all the people are like you. And we say that even if there is an anti-Western backlash, at least it's not a backlash against your own people. Therefore, there could be some sort of normal anti-colonialist movement that would be based not on religion, but maybe against the West while working together as Iraqis. For those reasons, we call you to propose.
I'd like to thank the members of government for that speech and look across the table to the member of opposition here.
So far in this debate, all that you hear is the practical reasons for things to work or not work. Closing opposition is coming and telling you, A, why by principle we think that it's wrong to brainwash people to all kinds of agendas, especially not to atheist agendas within the current situation in Iraq. Second of all, we're going to explain to you how it affects the actual situation between moderate and extremists within the Islam, when the only buzzwords you heard so far are Sinai and Shiite. But we have an important difference between Wasatiyim and Salafim and the way they interpret the Islam within the Sunnis and the Shiite, and the fight that's going on between them and the effect on Muslims within Western countries back at home, how they will perceive this message. Before, a few points of rebuttal to the previous speaker. So governments so far are afraid to admit that they are actually supposed to endorse and support the spread of atheism within those countries. What does it mean? That Monica comes up and tells you that she wants two people to hide their religions, to do it at home. Two problems with that. A, we don't see, and it is very counterintuitive, the distinction that she made between the public sphere and the private sphere. By comparative, it's supposed to be the other way around. It's supposed to be that people will internalize the message of atheism within their home, thus affecting the public sphere. It does not work the other way around. When the public sphere is secular, the people will be religious at home, and this will in somehow affect the modern day-to-day life of how people conduct themselves. Furthermore, note that Islam is a very public religion. What does it mean? You have prayers, you have holidays, you have services, you have sacrament, and you have the imams and the sheikhs making sermons to the people. That means that the Islam, by definition, is a religion that was meant to live in the public sphere. The shahada that you hear from the mosque is an act of sovereignty over the public sphere. This is one of a key notion within the Islam. This is something that Islamists that even do not live in Muslim countries, in Europe, in Israel, in the United States, are still keeping and are still adhering. This is an inherent part of Islam. We do not see and we do not get an explanation how you can actually separate Islam from the public sphere within a Muslim country. Into our case, note, we say that by taking social services, but by taking inherent services to people's life within a poor country, you are practically coercing them and brainwashing them into Western ideologies, and we say that morally and by principle, this is wrong. Why? Two scenarios to the question. What is not a clash in this debate? That the situation in Iraq is not that well. What does it mean to us in this debate? That even if we take governments at their strongest suit, when they are telling you there will be massive people who are coming in to this school, this is still bad for us. Why? Because you are giving them the needed social services that they need. Welfare, education, the exact things that they don't have. By principle, you are inherently forcing them to go to your side and to listen to what you have to say. Why do we think that principally is wrong? If the situation in Iraq is so bad as they are saying, we are saying that it's principally wrong to take people out of their belief, the belief that gets them through their day-to-day life, the belief that gets them to support and that gives them the support that they need within their lives. What does it mean? Mosques are social anchors. Communities are social anchors. By principle, you are taking people away from whatever they felt comfortable before and forcing them to actually adjust to a way of life that they are not used to. What more do we say to you on this part? We are saying to you that the society itself is not ready and not unwilling to be an atheist society. The entire public sphere, the entire slang, the entire way that people talk to each other, the entire culture is based on this religion. You are practically taking people from everything they knew based on your Western ideologies that you deem to be the right ones for people that you don't understand the nuance, and actually coercing them to adhere to your stuff and taking away one of the only light spots that they have within their lives. Now, by principle, we say this is wrong. Closing. That won't happen here because Jews did it because they fought for their lives. They had to hide from the Inquisition. This is not the case in Iraq, and we think that it was bad that the Jews had to do it in the past. We don't see why the Muslims have to do it now. Second point, and let's talk about moderation within the Islam itself. Note that the Islam is a clash between Wasatiyim and Salafim. What does it mean to us in this debate? It's the two schools of how to interpret the actual Sharia law. That means that it does not have anything to do with Sunnis and Shiites. You have Sunnis who are Wasatiyim as ISIS, and you have Shiites who are Wasatiyim as Salafim, as the Hezbollah in south of Lebanon. What does it mean? That means that within the Islam, we have moderate way of life that can actually interpret Islam in a way that we want people to believe, and we think this is the thing that we need to strengthen. How are we harming this now? And this is a concrete solution for this. ISIS, Jabhat al-Nusra, Hezbollah are trying to describe themselves as synonymous to Islam itself. What does it mean? They are trying to define themselves as Islam. If you are not us, you are not Muslim. The first thing that Bin Laden did when he left Saudi Arabia is to declare the regime in Saudi Arabia is not an Islamic regime. They are trying to pose themselves as the Islam, and whoever is not subscribing to them is not Islamic. How do we fight that message? We are actually need to strengthen voices and people within Islam itself that can raise a moderate Islam, a more comprehensive Islam. How do we arm this now? If I am a boy in Iraq today, lived under American occupation, my aunt died in American shelling, my father got stripped down in front of my eyes in a checkpoint on the way to Baghdad. All my life I learned to hate this message, and I'm hearing the message from extremists, from ISIS and from other groups who are saying to me how the West is demonizing us, how the West is trying to take away our identities. I am more likely to listen to them the minute I see that the West is actually coercing me by taking the media services that I need and trying to make me to subscribe to his values and to his beliefs. Furthermore, think about Muslims, and this is an extension also brought to us exclusively by us, of Muslims living in Western countries, already fighting for their identities inside Western countries, already living a day-to-day life of social alienation because of their ethnicity. How are they supposed to feel when they are feeling they have to fight a daily life on their identity? Now the West not only is trying to change them back now the West is also trying to change them back in their home countries, try to take the roots of their families. This is a massive effect that also drives people away from actually subscribing to better values of better moderation in Islam within the West. What have we shown you in this debate? A, by principle, you cannot brainwash people to any belief in our opinion, and especially not for ideologies that works for you in the West and may not work in the East, Middle East. Second of all, we are telling you, you are hurting the way that moderate Islam can evolve and fight ideas, dangerous ideas, like the fact that ISIS is Islam and gives other versions to Islam. That's why, by principle, we beg you to oppose.
I would like to thank the member of opposition for that fine speech and call upon the government whip to conclude the case of the opposition bench. Hear, hear.
Ready? Okay. Shh, guys, please.
Honorable panel, on closing government, we are proud to say that all the nice theoretical, principle, moral ideas that oppositions are trying to claim in this debate don't actually mean that much at the point at which you have people being murdered in the street exactly because you have a religious conflict inside Iraq today. My partner came up and described to you very accurately how actually Iraq looks like today. We explained to you why, when opening opposition come up and tell us, look, religion or the Islam is not inherently violent, right? We have political issues. We come and tell you, yes, but the political problems are linked to the religious identity and to the different types of Islamic people that we have in Iraq today. What does this tell us? This tells us that till we find a way to settle the conflict between the Shiis and the Sunnis and the other minorities inside of Iraq, you don't actually have a chance of stabilizing the place and giving them a better future. That's what we're achieving on our side of the house. No. Let's directly engage what we heard from the previous speaker. And I would like to start with mentioning that the third point we just heard of wanting to promote a specific type of Islam, one that's better and not that violent and countering ISIS, is actually promoting and imposing a specific identity or specific ideology or values which goes against their entire principal case on their first point. So they probably should make up their mind, what do they stand for in this debate? Moreover, we come and tell you, they tell us that, well, we are only supporting or we are only claiming external effects of this motion and how people look like. No, we come and tell you, A, this is probably how it's going to look like. We're telling you that this is the first step to actually create some sort of stability. And we say the third thing, this is the first step for actually internalizing these particular messages. Because look, when you look at the reality today, you see the United States is still present in Iraq. We still have huge forces over there. The United States cannot leave Iraq currently because at that point, all hell breaks loose with all the conflicts going out there. We also show you why currently the most important conflict over there and the most antagonistic feelings are towards other streams of Islam, because that's where most of the terrorist attacks are actually aimed at. The last terror attack in Baghdad was on civilian Iraqi population, not against US forces who are on the ground there. Meaning we need to change the way we are intervening because they're already there. Now what does opposition come and tell us? They give us this alternative, this nice alternative, you know what? Have neutral schools. Several problems with their alternative, and why do they not actually solve this particular problem? A, at no point did they explain to us why these neutral schools will not appear as Western imperialistic or Western intervention that they're so much against. But even if not, at their best, we come and tell you this only gives the different types of Islam in Iraq the power and the ability to continue to fight one another, because it's making them stronger while you are not actually solving the religious conflict in this particular area. Moreover, as my partner showed you, you're actually preventing a chance of a more homogenic society that in the future will be able to fight this United States imperialistic better once we are united and not fighting one another inside of Iraq. How exactly does this happen? First of all, we come and tell you, look, the opposition are so concerned that you're forcing them to do things. We come and tell you, no, we're giving them a choice. We come and tell you that it may be a choice between two things that are not ideal, but it is still a choice. We come and tell you we think most people are actually going to take this choice because it's a better alternative. My partner is the one to actually analyze to you why and exactly how, specifically with the POI that we offer about the Jewish diaspora in Spain, how you can still be religious, still have your own beliefs, but not necessarily express them any way you want. Moreover, you can still express them by, for example, not gathering in a mosque, but rather gathering in a community center. You can still express your religion by donating to charity, for example, which is all that's fine. The thing is that now you cannot openly go, or you're probably going to choose not to openly go with certain elements of clothing. You're not openly going to go to particular mosques. And we think that's a wonderful idea. And we think that people are going to buy into it, despite the fact that opposition tell you, well, no, you're going to be suspicious towards the system. We're saying at their best, even if people are suspicious toward the system, what they're going to say, you know what, we can screw over the West. We can take all that they're giving us and still believe and not really become atheists. And that is perfectly fine by us, because we're saying that you're still getting the effect on the appearance on the outside, which is the most crucial thing. Monica explains to you and does not get proper response from the previous speaker how now you A, can no longer attack other people on the street because you cannot recognize them as someone that is different from you and from what you believe in. B, we come and tell you how this has an influence, how this specifically affects children growing up in an environment that is less religion and less focused on these differences. The fact that they are hearing different narratives at school, even if at home they're hearing other narratives, at least now you have a combination, not only the narratives coming from home. We're saying when people that you recognize someone as different or from a different belief, and you don't have to fear that they're going to take away or steal your resources, you have a better chance of decreasing the hatred in the long term and actually getting cooperation. But I'll be happy to allow opening to say why they disagree.
Yeah, your assumption that they will cooperate or exploit the West is not a shade for our analysis that radicalization will lead to less cooperation with the West and more internal
Okay,
conflict.
but here's the thing. At the point of which we offer you a POI and you ignore the fact the United States is already present in Iraq, you never explain to us what actually is the delta of these anti-Western feelings or the delta of the conflict between them, specifically because of this particular motion. Also, we show you how it's very easily to make sure that you have a you have a huge range of these schools in the different areas where Shias and Sunnis live, or more schools and more guards in particularly Baghdad, to make sure that you don't have to have this constant fear every day when you go to school. We tell you, because the situation in Iraq today is so bad, because you can build this in a way that will be easy for people to buy into, there's a huge chance that at least a lot of people are going to buy into this. At the point at which you have this critical mass, even if not everyone, you're already changing the way the appearance on the street looks today. You're already changing the amount of tension between the people. You're already decreasing the violence in the street, meaning the basic rights of these people is actually preserved better on our side of the house. So all in all, we come and tell you that, you know what, even if we have some sort of obligation to do so, we're saying this is a particular thing that we should do now because it's benefiting us, because it's benefiting the citizens of Iraq, the opposition so much care about. We're saying at the point of which they're being murdered on the street, the beliefs, they cannot actually practice them. That is why we're preventing that. Thank you.
I would like to thank the Opposition Whip for that fine speech and call upon the Opposition Whip to conclude this debate.
Dear panel, 3 points of clash to summarize this debate today. First clash is the morality of the matter. Is it okay to actually impose Western ideology? Second clash is going to be, will this lead to more moderation or more radicalization in Iraq? And thirdly, the alternatives. How do we actually, how we most reasonably achieve a brighter future for Iraq? Before that, just one point of rebuttal that doesn't quite fit in, and the rest is going to be incorporated inside the clashes. So we're being accused of actually being in tension with ourselves because we are promoting one type of Islam, and then we say we cannot impose. To which we say, listen, in every type of education, there is a certain amount of something that you can go out and cry, listen, you're imposing. Even when being educated to democracy, even if you're being just educated to not murder other people, then you can say, hey, you're imposing your values on me. We say there's a huge, massive difference between passing on an ideology that goes out against the very fiber of your identity, meaning you believe in Allah, you believe that Muhammad is his prophet, and then I tell you those people just aren't relevant to you and don't exist, then to just promote a more moderate type of Islam and going with you and with your belief system, we say that we're perfectly fine with this. So, moving on to the first clash. Now, what you hear from OG on the morality of matters is basically, listen, we created the situation, therefore we are responsible for it. Now, it never occurred to them that if, to begin with, our intervenence has created all of these problems, then it might not be the best idea to actually keep and intervene more. We say that the only relevant question is whether we can actually help them or not. And this is not a principled point, this is actually a practical point. It's just the same as if I ran someone over in my car, it wouldn't be the best idea to offer him CPR if I am not qualified for it because I am responsible for it. The only question that matters is whether I am actually able to do so. So no really principled point coming from OG. Then we hear from CG that basically there are no principles, only the situation on the ground, so they forgo that. They do tell you though, however, we are not actually imposing anything, we are allowing you choice because you can still be religious in your own home. We say that this is impossible. My partner already tells you that Islam is a public religion. A lot of its ceremonial, a lot of its the way that you actually have to live your life is within the mosque, is within the community, and we say that there is no choice in actually telling you, hey, if you want to be a religious person, then you have to do it within the confines of your own home, your small community center, or stuff such as this. This is very much imposing, and the example that they give you about the Spanish actually deporting all of the Jews and making them convert is exactly the proof that this is what they're actually offering you in this debate. Now we do hear from OO, they mention coercion, but pay attention that this point is that this will be perceived as coercion for pushing more and more Iraqi youth to radicalization. So this is basically, again, a practical point. The only team that gives you a really principled point of this debate is us. And what do we tell you? We tell you there is something inherently immoral when you are taking someone that is in a dire situation and you're offering him help that he that he really depends on. This means that they don't have a choice, because if the situation in Iraq is so bad, as all of this debate agrees, and we come and tell you, we can help you, we can provide you help, but we demand that you forego some of your identities, and this is the very definition of coercion. Moreover, we say that and my partner mentioned this, is that for these people in this dire situation, religion and belief and faith in Allah is something that really helps them go on and live through life. We say that it's unfair to actually demand that you let go on this and then you remain in the bad situation that you're in. Not yet. Moving on to the second clash, will this lead to more moderation or to radicalization? So what we hear from OO is basically this will be perceived as coercion and will create suspicion against the West, pushing more and more people towards ISIS. Of course, we agree with this. OG comes up with this very naive case telling us, yeah, they value education in the long run. Everyone is going to be completely neutral and they're going to love each other and live happily ever after together and be atheist and whatever. OCG basically tells you, listen, so public sphere is going to be secular, private sphere is going to be religious, and we need to respond to this. So we say, A, where does this exist that people are actually today, that people are actually spending their lives on the public sphere as religious people, and when the private sphere is not? B, what have you done with it? If they still believe in if they still believe in Islam, then they are still susceptible to all of the ideas coming from ISIS. And thirdly, we say, moreover, when you are asked to hide your religion, then you are more prone to actually be more devout. You are actually more prone to be more angry and therefore more susceptible for ISIS. And what do we tell you in this clash? We say that we are fighting against ISIS what is an ideological war. We say that our audience that we are trying to turn to are people that are religious, and religious is a basic part of their identity. They believe in Allah, they believe in Muhammad, and we say that the best way to actually reach out to them is not making them go a huge step of actually letting go on everything they've been taught their entire life. We need them to take a smaller step. Therefore, we're all in favor of teaching them Islam that is more moderate, of showing them that ISIS is not what Islam is, that there is an alternative within Islam to what we actually want to achieve. Yes, ma'am.
Your entire point about radicalization relies on the fact that you will lead people to radicalize. We show that there will be less their influence because people won't go to their mosques and have no ways of actually getting these.
Monica, if you would have paid attention, I already answered that. We say that people are even more susceptible when they want to go to the mosque but cannot go to the mosque now because they need those medical services. And now, A, they're angry. B, they feel that they have to hide away their own identity, making them even more susceptible for radicalization. So now you heard from OO. Okay, so basically OO gives you, this pushes people further to radicalization. We tell you, it makes ISIS the entire idea of Islam. Islam is ISIS. And now if the West is trying to make you atheist, then obviously these are the only two things that exist. Western infidels versus ISIS, the saviors that are Islam. We say this doesn't only affect, the people in Iraq, but also Muslims in Western countries themselves that pose a great threat to actually Western countries, because now this crystallizes the idea that they are the true Islam, and of course this is bad. Very quickly, the last clash of alternatives. How do we actually achieve a brighter future? What's certain is that there's no magical solutions, right? What we need to ask is what is most likely to happen. And we say that if we don't actually make you go through a huge leap, but only a small leap, this is the best way, in the most likely way, for in the long range, to actually create a better situation for Iraq and to actually tackle ISIS. For all of these reasons, yeah, it's done. For all of these reasons.